Last week, I watched a rider nearly get crushed between two cars because he was doing something that 90% of us do in city traffic. And the worst part is, I've done the exact same thing probably 100 times. Today we're going through the 5 most dangerous behaviors that riders fall into when navigating city streets. Let me tell you, man, these aren't rare mistakes made by beginners. These are common habits that even experienced riders develop over time. But hey, by the end of this video, you'll recognize every single one of these behaviors and hopefully catch yourself before you become another statistic. Number 1, the split-second decisions that kill. All right, so you know that feeling when, you're stuck behind a line of cars, crawling through downtown traffic, and man, you spot just the perfect gap between 2 vehicles up ahead. Like your brain starts doing the math. You've got the power to slip through there, no problem. The cars are barely moving anyway. What could go wrong? Well, this is where most of us make our first big mistake, and it's something I call it aggressive lane splitting. Now before anyone gets upset, I'm not talking about legal lane splitting in slow or stopped traffic. I'm talking about threading the needle between moving cars at speed because we convince ourselves, we're just being efficient riders. The problem is we're actually turning ourselves into unpredictable missiles that other drivers can't track or anticipate. Here's what happens that even experienced riders don't fully grasp. When you're splitting between moving vehicles, your reaction time becomes completely useless. Think about it. You're doing maybe 30 miles per hour through a gap that's designed for vehicles doing 15. The car on your left suddenly decides to change lanes. You've got maybe half a second to react, but your bike needs at least a full second to change direction at that speed. The math just doesn't work. I learned this one the hard way about 3 years ago on my commute through downtown. Heavy traffic, maybe going 20 miles per hour, and I spotted this beautiful opening right between a pickup truck and a sedan. I gunned it through there, feeling pretty smart about my superior riding skills. The sedan driver decided right at that moment to move into the left lane without signaling. Man, I missed his rear bumper by maybe 6 inches, and even that only because I laid the bike over so hard I scraped my peg. That wake-up call probably saved my life. The physics in that kind of situation are brutal. Most riders never think about it. When you're splitting aggressively, you're asking other drivers to predict your movement when you can't even predict theirs. Cars change lanes, drivers open doors, people swerve around potholes. All this happens in the same just couple of seconds. You're threading through their space at twice their speed. But here's the thing that gets us into trouble. We convince ourselves we're skilled enough to handle whatever comes up. We've done it successfully, probably dozens of times before, so our confidence builds. Every clean split reinforces this false belief that we've got some special ability to read traffic and react faster than physics even allows. We start looking for tighter gaps. We split at higher speeds. We push the envelope because previous success makes us feel invincible. Then comes that moment that changes everything. Maybe it's a car door swinging open from a parked vehicle you didn't see. Maybe it's a driver who, jerks the wheel to avoid a pothole just as you're passing. Maybe it's someone who finally checks their mirror and panics when they see you. In that split second, all your riding skills become completely irrelevant because you've put yourself in a situation where physics wins every time. When lane splitting goes wrong, it can go very wrong. Riders can get crushed between cars or thrown into traffic, especially when doing at high speed, While careful lane splitting in slow traffic, it can be safe, but aggressive riders often pay the price with serious, sometimes life-changing injuries. And the worst part is most of these accidents could be avoided by just recognizing that urge to aggressively split and making a different choice. I'm not saying never split lanes where it's legal and safe. I'm saying recognize when you're about to make a high-risk decision based on impatience rather than safety. That gap might look tempting, but it's not worth spending 6 months learning to walk again. Once I started paying attention to this behavior, I realized how often I was making aggressive splitting decisions without even thinking about it. The urge would hit me and I'd just go for it. Now when I feel that impatience building, I just remind myself that arriving 30 seconds later beats not arriving at all. It's one of those things where it's just a simple mental shift, but seriously, it's probably saved me from several close calls. If you've ever pushed through a gap like that, let me know in the comments before we jump to the next one, because aggressive splitting often leads riders straight into another high-risk situation that happens at every single intersection in the city. Number 2, the yellow light gamble. All right, picture this scenario that every rider knows by heart. You're cruising through the city and you see that traffic light up ahead. Oh, it's green right now, but you know it's been green for a while. You're doing maybe 35 miles per hour and you're about 300 feet out when that light flicks to yellow. Your brain immediately starts running calculations. Can I make it? Should I gun it? Or do I slam on the brakes and risk getting rear-ended by the car behind me? This is where we fall into our second major trap, and it's something most of us rationalize as smart time management. Running yellow lights and pushing red lights feels like we're being efficient riders who understand traffic flow better than car drivers. We tell ourselves, we're not being reckless, we're just using our superior acceleration and smaller size to our advantage. Problem is, we're actually putting ourselves in the most dangerous position possible at the worst possible time. Here's what's really happening that most riders never consider. When we calculate whether we can make that light, we're thinking like car drivers. We estimate timing based on how long it would take a car to clear the intersection from our current position. But motorcycles don't behave like cars. We can accelerate faster, but we're also way smaller and harder to see. Cross-traffic drivers who are waiting to turn left or right are making their own calculations about when that light will change and when it's safe to move. In general, they're expecting car-sized objects moving at car speeds, not motorcycles that can suddenly appear in their field of vision moving much faster than anticipated. I watched this play out in real time about 6 months ago at a busy intersection downtown. This rider was approaching a yellow light on what looked like a sports bike. The light had been yellow for maybe 2 seconds already, but he gunned it anyway. He cleared the intersection just as the light turned red, but here's the scary part. A delivery truck in the cross traffic had already started creeping forward because the driver assumed he had plenty of time before any more traffic would come through. That rider missed getting T-boned by maybe 2 feet. And I guarantee you, the truck driver never even saw him coming. The invisibility factor is absolutely critical here, and most riders completely underestimate it. When you're racing through a changing light, you're moving through the intersection at exactly the moment when cross-traffic drivers are shifting their attention from the red light to the road ahead. They're not scanning for fast-moving motorcycles. They're looking for the predictable flow of car traffic that should have already cleared the intersection. Your headlight might catch their peripheral vision, but their brain doesn't have time to process what they're seeing or react appropriately. But here's what makes this behavior so dangerous for riders specifically. Every successful yellow light run builds false confidence. You start thinking you're really good at reading traffic timing. You begin to push the envelope a little more each time. That yellow light that's been on for 1 second becomes 2 seconds. 2 seconds becomes 3. Before you know it, you're basically running red lights and telling yourself it's just aggressive riding. The confidence trap gets even worse because motorcycle acceleration makes these bad decisions feel successful. You can blast through an intersection that a car never could have made. Your bike responds instantly when you twist that throttle. This creates a feedback loop, where your superior acceleration capability encourages increasingly risky timing decisions. You start to believe you can always power your way out of questionable situations. Then comes that moment that changes everything. Maybe the cross traffic starts moving earlier than you expected. Maybe your bike doesn't accelerate quite as fast as usual because you're carrying extra weight, or the road surface is slick. Maybe you just misjudged the timing by half a second. In that instant, you realize you've put yourself directly in the path of cross traffic that has every legal right to be moving into the intersection. Intersection crashes are one of the deadliest threats riders face in urban traffic. According to national data, they account for over 40% of fatal motorcycle collisions involving another vehicle. And lots of these happen during signal changes, when drivers misjudge a rider's speed or just fail to see them altogether. These aren't complex pileups, they're violent T-bone impacts, with a motorcycle taking a direct hit from a vehicle often weighing 5 times as much. The math here is actually pretty simple. Those extra 30 seconds you save by running a yellow light represent maybe 0.1% of your total commute time. But that same 30 seconds could be the difference between making it home safely and spending months in a hospital bed. When you really think about it that way, the risk-reward calculation, it becomes pretty obvious. Now, this risky intersection behavior often leads riders directly into our next dangerous habit that happens in all the space between those traffic lights. Number 3, the invisible rider syndrome. Okay, so you know that feeling when you're stuck behind some car that's doing exactly the speed limit in the left lane and you're running late for work. So you pull up closer, thinking maybe if you stay right there in their mirror, they'll get the hint and speed up or move over. Or maybe you slide into that spot right next to their rear bumper in their blind spot because, hey, at least you're making progress, right? Well, this is our third dangerous behavior, and it might be the sneakiest one, because it feels like assertive riding when it's actually making you completely invisible. Most riders think tailgating and riding in blind spots is about, like positioning ourselves to be more noticeable. We convince ourselves that staying close to other vehicles, forces them to acknowledge our presence. The logic seems sound. If I'm right there behind you or next to you, then obviously you know I'm here. The problem is, we're actually positioning ourselves in exactly the spots where human vision and attention work against us. We're not being assertive. We're disappearing. I saw this play out perfectly about a month ago during rush hour traffic, and this rider on what looked like a ninja was following maybe 10 feet behind an SUV in heavy stop-and-go traffic. Every time the SUV slowed down, the rider would pull up even closer, like he was trying to, push the driver to go faster. Then the SUV driver decided to change lanes. No signal, no warning, just started moving right directly into the space where the motorcycle was sitting. The rider had to brake so hard, he almost went down, and the SUV driver clearly had no idea he was even there. Here's what's really happening that most riders don't understand. There's this psychological phenomenon where our brains filter out objects that don't pose an immediate threat or require immediate attention. So, when you're tailgating a car, your motorcycle becomes part of that car's visual footprint in other drivers' minds. They see the car, but their brain categorizes you as, somehow connected to it. You become invisible. Not because they can't physically see you, but because their brain decides, you're not important enough to track separately, basically. The headlight thing makes it even worse. Riders think having our headlights on all the time, solves the visibility problem. We assume that bright light cutting through traffic makes us impossible to miss. But here's the thing about human vision. When you're riding in someone's blind spot or following too close, that headlight just becomes a part of the visual clutter. It doesn't make you more visible. It just becomes another light in a sea of lights that drivers learn to ignore. The worst part is how riders mistake being seen for being remembered. A driver, might glance in their mirror, register that there's a motorcycle back there. Their eyes might even focus on you for a split second. But 3 seconds later, when they decide to change lanes, their brain has already forgotten you exist. This isn't because they're bad people or careless drivers. It's just how human attention works when it's overloaded with information. Then comes that terrifying moment when everything goes wrong. The driver you've been tailgating slams on their brakes because traffic ahead stopped unexpectedly, or that car you've been riding next to in their blind spot decides to merge into your lane because, as far as they know, that space is empty. In that instant, you realize that all your aggressive positioning has actually made you less safe, not more safe. Research on how human vision processes motorcycle-sized objects shows some pretty disturbing patterns. Our brains are wired to track larger objects and predictable movement patterns. Motorcycles violate both of these principles. We're small enough that we can disappear behind A-pillars and in blind spots that wouldn't hide a car. We're also maneuverable enough that our movement patterns seem random and, unpredictable to other drivers. When you combine small size with unpredictable positioning, you create the perfect recipe mentally for being overlooked. The solution isn't complicated, but it requires fighting against every instinct that tells you to get closer to make yourself known. Strategic positioning means putting yourself where drivers naturally look, not where you think they should look. This means staying out of blind spots, even when it feels like you're losing position in traffic. It means maintaining following distance, even when the car ahead is driving you crazy. It means accepting that sometimes the best place for a motorcycle is not the most aggressive place. When I started riding in visible zones instead of aggressive zones, my stress level dropped dramatically. I stopped having those heart-stopping moments where cars would suddenly move into my space. The commute, it actually became more relaxing because I wasn't constantly fighting to maintain position in spots where I couldn't be seen properly. This positioning problem, it becomes even more dangerous when riders add speed to the equation, which brings us to our next behavior that makes motorcycles completely unpredictable to everyone else on the road. Number 4, the speed trap mentality. That kind of unpredictability, really reaches its peak when riders fall into what I like to call the speed trap mentality. So picture this scenario that happens to every rider in city traffic. You've been crawling along behind a bus for 3 blocks, maybe doing 15 miles per hour in a 35 zone. Finally, you get past that rolling roadblock, and there's this beautiful empty stretch of road ahead with the next light still green. Your right hand starts getting twitchy on the throttle. Time to make up for all that lost time, right? Well, this is where we fall into our 4th dangerous trap. And it's something that turns motorcycles into completely unpredictable hazards for every other driver on the road. Most riders think of urban speed bursts as smart riding. We tell ourselves, we're just using our bike's superior acceleration to get back up to the flow of traffic. It makes perfect sense. Cars are slow to accelerate, so we need to make up ground when we can. Problem is, these sudden speed changes create the most dangerous and unpredictable rider behavior that other drivers encounter. We're not being efficient. We're turning ourselves into moving targets that nobody can track or anticipate. I tell you, this is one of those times where, I learned this lesson the hard way about 2 years ago on my morning commute. Got stuck behind a garbage truck for about 4 blocks, doing maybe 20 in a 40 zone. When I finally got around that thing, I was pretty frustrated, so I gunned it hard to make up time. Went from 20 to 50 in about 3 seconds. Felt great until I caught up to the next red light where I sat for 2 minutes watching all the cars I'd blown past slowly catch up to me. All that risk for literally 0 time savings. Here's what riders don't think about when we're doing these urban speed runs. When you rapidly accelerate from slow traffic speeds to well above the speed limit, you're asking other drivers to judge your approach speed when their brains are calibrated for normal traffic flow. A driver looking to make a left turn sees you coming, but their brain calculates your arrival time based on the speed they expect expect you to be traveling. When you're doing 50 in a 35 zone, that mental math becomes completely wrong and potentially deadly. The false math that riders use to justify this behavior is pretty interesting when you break it down. You see, we convince ourselves that going faster between lights somehow makes up for time lost in slow traffic. So if I was doing 15 for 3 blocks, but now I can do 50 for 1 block, then obviously I'm gaining time. But, come on, no. The reality is urban traffic is controlled by traffic lights, not by the speed you travel between them. Those lights are timed for specific traffic flows, and no amount of acceleration is going to change when they cycle. But here's where it gets really dangerous. These sudden speed changes, they turn motorcycles into moving hazards that drivers just cannot predict. Think about it, from a car driver's perspective. They see traffic moving at a certain pace. They make decisions based on that flow. Then suddenly, there's a motorcycle moving twice as fast as everything else. Their brain can't process that information quickly enough to make safe decisions about lane changes or turns. The speed differential issue is what kills riders in urban environments. It's not just raw speed that causes accidents. It's the difference between your speed and the speed of surrounding traffic. When, just about everyone is moving at roughly the same pace, drivers can predict traffic patterns and they make safe moves. When one vehicle is moving significantly faster or slower than the flow, it breaks down that predictability and creates collision opportunities. Traffic accident data shows this pattern, clearly. Urban motorcycle accidents often involve speed differentials rather than excessive speeds. A rider doing 50 in a 35 zone is actually at a higher risk than, a rider doing 70 on a highway where everybody else is doing 65. The faster you're moving relative to surrounding traffic, the more likely you are to encounter a driver who misjudges your approach speed or fails to see you entirely. The worst part is consistent speeds, they actually get you through city traffic faster than these acceleration bursts. When you maintain steady speeds that match traffic flow, you hit fewer red lights. You spend less time braking and accelerating. You use less fuel and put less stress on your bike. Obviously, most importantly, you become predictable to other drivers, which makes every interaction safer. When I started riding at consistent speeds instead of trying to make up time with acceleration, my commute became way less stressful. I wasn't constantly having to make split-second decisions about whether to gun it or brake hard. I could actually plan my moves instead of just reacting to every gap in traffic. Ever seen that bike zoom by and disappear around a corner? Comment if you've nearly gotten blindsided by a speed burst, because this speed management problem becomes even more dangerous when you add something that's become a huge issue for modern riders. Number 5, the distraction trap. All right, y'all, let's talk about something that's become a huge problem for riders in the last few years. You're sitting at a red light, and your phone buzzes with a text message. Or maybe your GPS is giving you directions and you need to glance down to see which way to turn next. Could be your buddy just posted something on social media and you want to check it real quick while traffic is stopped. This stuff seems harmless enough, but it's actually our 5th dangerous behavior, and it's the one that makes every other risky habit we've talked about 10 times more likely to kill you. Riding while distracted is the behavior that multiplies every other dangerous habit on this list. When your attention is split between riding and literally anything else, you lose the ability to make good decisions about lane splitting, yellow lights, positioning, and speed management. You're not just adding one more risk to your ride. You're making every existing risk exponentially more dangerous. Most experienced riders, they think they've got this figured out. We tell ourselves, we only check our phones when we're stopped at lights. We only adjust our GPS when traffic is moving slowly. We only take our eyes off the road for a split second. The problem is, Even experienced riders don't realize how much mental bandwidth urban riding actually requires. When you split that attention even slightly, you create dangerous gaps in awareness that turn routine situations into emergencies. Oh man, I watched this play out, perfectly. About 3 months ago at a busy intersection downtown, this rider was stopped at a red light checking his phone. Looked like he was reading a text message or something like that. I don't know, but the light turned green and he put his phone away and started moving. But while he was looking down, he missed the fact that cross traffic was still clearing the intersection. So a delivery van was running the red light from the other direction. The rider pulled out right into the path of that van, and he only avoided getting hit because the van driver was paying attention, and they managed to stop in time. So here's what most riders don't understand about the cognitive load of urban riding. Your brain is constantly processing hundreds of inputs every second. You're tracking the position and speed of every vehicle around you. You're reading traffic signals and street signs and monitoring road conditions and weather. You're planning your route, watching for hazards. You're making split-second decisions about lane position and following distance. All of this happens automatically when you're fully focused, but any distraction creates gaps in this processing. The most common distractions that riders don't even recognize as dangerous are actually the subtle ones. Adjusting your helmet or gloves while riding, thinking about work stress, or relationship problems, checking out an interesting building or attractive person on the sidewalk. These mental distractions are just as dangerous as looking at your phone because they pull your attention away from the constant risk assessment that keeps you alive in traffic. But here's where it gets really scary. Even minor distractions turn routine traffic situations into emergency scenarios. That car changing lanes ahead of you goes from a predictable maneuver to a sudden crisis because you didn't see them signal or start moving early. That pedestrian stepping into the crosswalk becomes a panic stop because you weren't tracking their movement. That pothole you normally would have avoided becomes a tank slapper because you weren't reading the road surface ahead. I mean, seriously, studies show that taking your eyes off the road for just 2 seconds, like glancing at your phone, can double your risk of crashing. Even brief distractions can add up to half a second of delayed reaction time. That might not sound like much, but in city traffic, that delay can be the difference between a close call and a trip to the emergency room. The mental distractions are actually worse than the physical ones, in some ways. When you're thinking about something other than riding, yeah, sure, your hands might be on the controls and your eyes might be on the road, but your brain isn't processing the information that it needs to keep you safe. We're running on autopilot in an environment that requires constant, active decision-making. When you eliminate distractions and focus completely on predictive riding, you stop having those heart-stopping moments where, danger seems to come out of nowhere. You start seeing potential problems developing long before they become actual emergencies. Try a distraction test on your next ride. Just count how many times your thoughts drift in 5 minutes. You'll see where your focus falls short. The scary truth is, none of these dangerous behaviors happen by themselves. They feed off each other in ways that most riders never recognize. Breaking this pattern starts with recognizing how it works. When you're aggressively lane splitting, you're more likely to run yellow lights to maintain momentum. When you're tailgating, you're more likely to speed up suddenly when gaps open. When you're distracted, you're more likely to make bad decisions about all these behaviors at once. It's a chain reaction. One bad habit snowballs into the next, creating this cascade effect that turns every city ride into a gamble. Be honest with yourself right now. Which of these have you caught yourself doing? Share your closest call below, and let's learn from each other. If you found this useful, hit subscribe so we can build a safer riding community together. Master these 5 shifts, and your city ride will become smoother, safer, and actually more fun.